Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm reporter Will Robinson Smith, so good to be with you in this pre-dawn countdown to liftoff from Space Launch Complex 40. We're broadcasting, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Less than an hour on the clock as things currently stand. SpaceX at this point in time, counting down towards a T0 liftoff of its Falcon 9 rocket with 28 Starlink V2 mini satellites on board at 5:01 a.m. Eastern, 09:01 UTC for our friends joining around the world. Our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, is running the technical operations of the broadcast alongside our John Pisani. Adam Bernstein out in the field, making sure all the cameras are in ship shape, ready to track the Falcon 9 rocket once it makes its ascent from Pad 40. And Michael Caine has the morning off, but you should be following all of our photographers at their handles that you see here on X. You can find Adam at ABurn NYC, John at John Pisani Photo, Michael at MD Caine Jr. And be sure to follow Spaceflight Now simply at Spaceflight Now. We're also on Blue Sky, Threads, and Facebook for those of you who are not on X. We'll also be joined later on in the broadcast with tracking assistance from our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images. We'll also be joined by Pete Carsons with Max Q Productions a little bit later on in the broadcast. As we're getting going early this Saturday morning, I want to thank the 100 plus of you who are getting up early for this launch or stayed up late. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream to allow some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. Our thanks to channel member and moderator Rick Donner for helping us out today. If you see any of the other mods cruise on in throughout the course of the broadcast, be sure to give them a big old Spaceflight Now hello. You can help make Rick's job that much easier just by following the rules of the live chat. We ask that you converse in English so that Rick and the other mods can respond as appropriate, that you refrain from delving into overt politics or religion, and that you treat each other with the kindness and respect that you yourself would like to be treated. Also, channel member Cumulus Granatus is in the chat with us today to help answer folks' questions as they arise. Speaking of channel members, our channel member community here on YouTube help make this and every other live launch opportunity broadcast possible. So thanks to folks like Chad Singer, Angela Cagle, Joni. Let's see who else we've got here this morning. Dark Robe. Looks like folks are still waking up. So appreciate the members who are here now, and we'll keep our eyes peeled for others who cruise on in throughout the course of the countdown. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, which is shop.spaceflightnow.com. Access to our member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments from here in Florida in 4K. And want to thank Joni for marking now 7 months with us as a channel member at the mission specialist level, who says, thanks Spaceflight Now for the great live stream. That's a little bit of housekeeping. If you have a comment or question about this mission or other goings on in the realm of space and spaceflight, you can use the YouTube Super Chat feature. Not only will you be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we cruise on through the countdown, but you'll also be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and that, my friends, is always very greatly appreciated. With all that out of the way, we're less than 54 minutes away from the planned liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket. Today's Falcon flight will be the company's 91st of the year so far, the 508th to date. As we continue to roll through the countdown, let's go ahead and take a beat to talk about the milestones that are still ahead of us as we're preparing to see SpaceX fuel its Falcon 9 there at the pad before liftoff, carrying those 28 Starlink V2 mini satellites up into low Earth orbit. Of course, things get rolling with the SpaceX launch director giving the go-ahead for the start of tanking. Generally speaking, this will happen at about T-minus 38 minutes. Once the go-ahead for fueling is granted, tanking of the Falcon 9 rocket will start at T-minus 35 minutes with a loading of RP-1, a rocket-grade kerosene on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages, and liquid oxygen will also flow on board the Falcon 9's first stage. T-minus 30 minutes is when SpaceX will start to load a cryogenic helium on board the pressure vessels for the Falcon 9's first stage. Same will be true on the second stage a few minutes afterwards. The helium is important, of course, because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. T-minus 23 minutes is when the second stage RP-1 tank loading wraps up. At T-minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds is when the Strongback chill down gets underway. SpaceX will thermally condition the feed lines at the pad ahead of second stage liquid oxygen load. We see this visually manifest as the so-called big vent at about T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds here at pad 40. That venting lasts about 4 minutes or so, tapering off at about 16 and a half before liftoff, followed shortly thereafter by the beginning of loading liquid oxygen aboard the rocket's second stage. 7 minutes before flight is the engine chill sequence, when SpaceX flows a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps on the 9 Merlin engines at the base of the Falcon booster. And that helps protect those engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during startup. 6 minutes out, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the Strongback retract. That's when the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings open up, and then the transporter erector, or the Strongback, will recline a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. It stays in that position until liftoff. And then at that point, it'll pull back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. 3 minutes out, the first stage liquid oxygen tank is full. Same is true on the second stage about a minute afterwards, at which point the Falcon 9 rocket is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, as we hear the call that the Falcon 9 is in startup, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will give their go for launch at T-minus 45 seconds. The engine ignition command is issued at T-minus 3 seconds, and if all 9 Merlins are healthy and ignite as expected, the command will be given for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 rocket for a T0 liftoff, once again targeting 5:01 a.m. Eastern, 09:01 UTC, or just about 50 minutes from now. T minus 49 minutes, 29 seconds and counting. For those of you who are not using the Starlink internet service with any noted regularity, may have just breezed past this uh, incident for the SpaceX constellation and service, but it did happen to go down on Thursday in a quite rare uh, full network outage that lasted more than 2.5 hours, excuse me, in total. SpaceX, through its Starlink X account, announcing the outage that happened beginning around 4 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, July 24th. Both the company and its founder, Elon Musk, taking the X to acknowledge the outage for customers around the world and stating that they were taking steps to try to ensure that that would not happen again. As the incident was wrapping up, the vice president of Starlink Engineering, Michael Nichols, took to his own X account to say that they had, at that point, mostly recovered and said the outage was, quote, due to failure of key internal software services that operate the core network. Didn't go into any more detail beyond that, but the service is now back up and working, and whatever changes SpaceX has made, as they term it, they're trying to not allow whatever happened to happen again. We'll, of course, see how that all unfolds. The Starlink internet service itself is less than a decade old. First operational batch of Starlink satellites launched back in 2019. In May of that year, and service in a beta testing form began the following year. As of today, there are currently more than 8,000 Starlink satellites in low Earth orbit. Today's launch will add another 28 to that mix. It's a busy Saturday for space and space flight, as of course we're preparing to see this Falcon 9 rocket lift off in about 46 and a half minutes from here on the Space Coast. Coming up later today, also from here in Florida, the three astronauts and one cosmonaut that make up the SpaceX Crew 11 mission are set to touch down at the Space Florida Launch and Landing Facility, formerly the Shuttle Landing Facility. Crews are preparing for the launch of that quartet coming up on the 31st is the current target launch date. The flight readiness review was conducted on Friday, and we're looking forward to the launch readiness review in the coming days. We're also keeping tabs at Launch Complex 39A for the appearance of the Falcon 9 rocket, which could be rolling out tonight. Not as we're live during the broadcast, I mean literally later on tonight. coming up on Monday the 28th, we should see a static fire of the Falcon 9 rocket in preparation for Crew 11 as well. That, of course, will also happen back at Pad 39A. That follows the dry dress rehearsal where the astronauts, cosmonaut, and flight team will conduct a full launch day rehearsal. The caveat that obviously they're not going to be fueling the Falcon 9 while the crew is on board during that uh, run through, which is why it's called a dry dress rehearsal. And then that'll be followed later on in the afternoon by the tanking process and the static fire at the conclusion. All that data will then roll into the review process for the launch readiness review the following day. And then we should get a briefing from NASA, SpaceX, and hopefully a launch weather officer just to let folks know what the odds of good weather are going to be for liftoff. Crew 11 will have a short handover period with the Crew 10 astronauts and cosmonaut currently on station. Get them familiarized with what's currently happening on board. And for those newbies who are flying to station for the first time, Zena Cardman and Oleg Botanov, get them acclimated with the space station that they've been training to come aboard, but will be boarding for the very first time. And Crew 10 is set to undock a few days after that. So look for an undocking early in the first full week of August. Time now, T minus 41 minutes, 36 seconds and counting. At the back end of today, we're also looking at the planned launch of another Falcon 9 rocket, this time from over at Space Launch Complex 4 East at Vandenberg. Starlink 17-2 is currently on tap for a liftoff just before 9 p.m. Pacific. A little before midnight here on the East Coast, 03:55 UTC for those around the world. We'll be live with coverage on that mission about 30 minutes prior to liftoff. Speaking of prior to liftoff, we're less than 41 minutes away from the departure of this Falcon 9 rocket you see live on your screen. In the next few minutes is when the SpaceX launch director should make the call on the start of prop load today, assuming that the current T0 is holding. little more than 38 minutes to go ahead of this Falcon 9 flight. Coming into this launch opportunity, the 45th Weather Squadron gave a pretty stellar outlook for departure, stating that the rocket has a greater than 95% chance of experiencing favorable weather at liftoff for both the primary and backup launch dates. So, on the off chance that SpaceX is unable to launch today, they do have another window available tomorrow. Same weather outlook, 95% go from a weather standpoint. Light liftoff winds trending between 5 and 10 miles per hour. Just a scant chance for interference from cumulus clouds, but honestly, not looking too shabby tonight. Might also catch potentially a little bit of a jellyfish effect as the rocket is set to lift off about an hour and 40 minutes ahead of sunrise. So might be a little too early for a really good jellyfish, but we shall see. The rocket is heading towards the sun. Light. Out to minus 35 minutes and counting. If in fact SpaceX has given the go ahead for the startup prop load, fueling of the Falcon 9 rocket is now underway. SpaceX has long since stopped issuing statements when it starts fueling its Falcon 9 rocket when it comes to its own Starlink missions. So we're reliant primarily on visual cues. So we'll punch in now a little bit closer to the rocket's first stage booster. Just above the tree line, you can see a little bit of lettering from SpaceX. You see that horizontal white band that runs across the rocket. It's around that point where we're starting to see, or where we will see a little bit of a frost line form and some vapor, as well as the super cold densified liquid oxygen begins flowing on board the rocket's first stage. And we are starting to see a little bit of vapor on the left-hand side of the rocket and more discernible frost line forming, which is a good visual indication that SpaceX is in fact fueling its Falcon 9 rocket at the pad, which means they are now locked into that T0 of 5:01 a.m. Eastern, 09:01 UTC. Because SpaceX uses the densified liquid oxygen, they implement a load and go style of fueling, which means they tank right up to the point of liftoff, or practically right up to that point. And once the fueling has begun, they no longer have the option of holding the countdown or adjusting within their launch windows. So it's 5:01 or bust at this point. About 31 and a half minutes left on the clock. T minus 30 minutes and counting. If you're just now joining us, you're watching Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the Starlink 10-26 mission with 28 Starlink V2 mini satellites on board this Falcon 9 rocket at Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. At this point in the countdown, SpaceX is fueling its Falcon 9 in preparation for a good liftoff. Also, at this point, they are loading a cryogenic helium onto the pressure vessels for the Falcon 9's first stage. Second stage helium load is coming up in the next few minutes. I want to thank the little more than 750 of you who are watching along with us live. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream to allow some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. As a reminder, in our shop, which includes discounts for members, that is shop.spaceflightnow.com, got some new mission patches in there for the forthcoming Crew 11 flight, as well as the launches of the Artemis 2 mission and the recently launched CRS-32 flight, most recent cargo run to the orbiting outpost. CRS-33 is coming up in the August time frame, following the departure of Crew 10, of course. And that'll be an important one since it includes Dragon that will be performing a boost of the International Space Station, part of the process of SpaceX helping to develop the U.S. deorbit vehicle, an augmented version of Dragon that, coming up at the end of the decade, will dock to the station and help to bring about the conclusion of the orbiting outpost in a controlled fashion. Taking a look at our live chat, want to thank a couple folks for their support this evening. Thanks to Christine Hurt for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Really appreciate that, Christine. And to our newest gifted channel member, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. And if you haven't already, be sure to thank Christine in the live chat. And we hope you decide to stick around with channel membership. Also want to thank channel member Joni for gifting a very generous $20 super chat. Thank you, Joni. Joni says, thanks, Will, Spaceflight Now, mods, and chat for the stream. Glad to finally make a launch. Missed some. We're glad to have you back, Joni. Hope all is well. And for all of you out there, let us know where you're checking in from. I know we've got, of course, plenty of folks here in Florida, but always good to see where our international audience is popping in from. In the meantime, the Falcon booster that is flying today's mission has the tail number B1078. This booster is looking to make its 22nd flight to space so far. That means it will soon be making its way back onto our list of Falcon 9 frequent flyers. Here's what the top five looks like at the moment. Once again, B1078 looking to come into that fifth place spot, tying alongside B1077. We'll see if SpaceX makes it another three-way tie and launches B1076 once again on its 22nd flight. SpaceX is looking to certify its first stage boosters for up to 40 flights apiece. Here's where the company stands on its Falcon flights as far as the most recent launch back on the 23rd. 90 missions so far on the year, looking for flight number 91 coming up in just a little less than 26 minutes from now. Coming up in the next few minutes will be the start of the so-called big vent as SpaceX prepares to chill the feed lines there at the pad ahead of second stage liquid oxygen load. Before we get there, want to go ahead and talk about the flight history for B1078 before it takes off for a 20-second time. Run through the brief history of this booster. As we're getting ready for a crew launch coming up on the 31st next week. This booster began flying also with a crew mission. That was the Crew 6 flight on Dragon Endeavour. Dragon Endeavour, of course, getting ready to launch it once again in support of Crew 11. That'll be its sixth flight to space, the first Crew Dragon spacecraft to fly for a sixth time. NASA and SpaceX are working to certify the Dragon spacecraft for up to 15 flights. They've got a number of components that have reached that milestone, but they are still working towards certifying the rest of the components, but they believe that they'll be ready to certify this Dragon for its sixth flight, obviously before it does lift off. There were some outstanding items that were mentioned during the Crew 11 news briefings that happened at the Johnson Space Center earlier this month. Presumably that work has since wrapped up or will wrap up very, very soon. Coming back to this booster, its next flight was a batch of SES-03B Empower satellites. Just saw a couple of those lift off on the Space Coast not too long ago. This particular flight, though, was back on April 28th of 2023, followed up by a string of Starlink missions after that. You had Starlink 6-4 on June 4th, 6-8 on August 7th, 6-16 on September 16th, and 6-31 on December 3rd. Moving into last year on Valentine's Day, this booster launched the USSF 124 mission. That was followed up by more Starlink missions. And Starlink 6-46 on March 25th, 6-53 on April 23rd, 6-60 on May 28th, 10-2 on June 23rd, 10-6 on August 2nd. And that was followed up by the flight of the Bluebird Block 1 satellites on behalf of AST Space Mobile Inc. After that, it's back to Starlink land we go for this booster, bringing us up to the present day. You had Starlink 10-13 on October 30th, 6-76 on November 27th, 12-6 on December 31st, and then 12-9 on February 8th, 12-16 on March 15th, 6-72 on April 6th, 6-84 on May 4th, and most recently 12-26 on June 13th. Currently, T minus 21 minutes, 23 seconds, and counting. In about 30 seconds, the chill down of the feed lines will begin, and the big vent set to start at T minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds. And there you see the big vent is now in motion. This process will continue on for the next 4 or so minutes, wrapping up and then preparing for second stage LOX load at T minus 16 minutes. With the big vent wrapped up, second stage LOX load is set to begin now at T-minus 16 minutes and counting. Today's Falcon 9 rocket launch set to be SpaceX's 445th reflight of a first stage booster, the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. Again, this will be also the 91st Falcon 9 flight of the year and the 268th overall orbital launch for SpaceX from Slick 40. Let's take a moment to talk about the Falcon 9 rocket itself, the workhorse vehicle for SpaceX, which stands 229 feet in height, or 70 meters. That's diameter of 12 feet, or 3.66 meters. Majority of that, of course, is made up by the rocket's first stage. Booster flying today, B-1078, which has flown 21 times before, looking for flight number 22 coming up here in the next 14 minutes. At the base of the first stage are the 9 Merlin engines, which gives the rocket its name. Burns a combination of liquid oxygen and a rocket-grade kerosene, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment are the black carbon fiber landing legs that are used to land the first stage on the drone ship. Today, SpaceX is using the vessel called a shortfall of gravitas. Above the first stage is the inner stage. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core, which is surrounded by carbon fiber. In that image on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the deployable hypersonic grid fins. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it comes back through the atmosphere. Tail first, like a big old dart heading towards the drone ship. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the vehicle's second stage. And at first stage, main engine cutoff, high-pressure helium is used to release those latches, and 4 pneumatic pushers ensure a clean separation. If we want to see a really excellent depiction of that, SpaceX shared some video from the launch of NASA's Tracers mission just a few days ago. Shows a really nice view inside the inner stage as stage separation was happening, and the rocket was performing a boost back burn heading towards touchdown at landing zone 4. So you see the cold gas thrusters really hop to in order to guide the booster away from the upper stage before that Merlin vacuum engine ignites. So you'll see that the nozzle for that upper stage engine housed safely inside the inner stage in that video. Speaking of that upper stage, second stage of the Falcon 9 rocket powered by a single modified Merlin engine. Just talking about that. It's referred to as a Merlin vacuum engine or an MVac engine. It's optimized for burns in the vacuum of space, which gives it its name. It produces more than 220,500 pounds of thrust. And on a Starlink flight, it will be fired twice before the deployment of the satellites on board. Like with the first stage, the upper stage of the Falcon 9 burns the same propellant mix, that being RP1 and LOX. Following the deployment of the 28 Starlink satellites, the upper stage engine will perform one final deorbit burn to drive it back into the atmosphere, where it will burn up to help eliminate creating unnecessary space debris on this mission. Finally, at the top of the Falcon 9 stack are the payload fairings that currently encapsulate the 28 Starlink V2 mini satellites. The fairing halves are 31 meters in height, 43 feet tall. Together, they are 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. Fairing halves will be recovered a little bit further downrange from where the first stage booster lands on the drone ship. They will then be brought back through Port Canaveral, turned over to the Hangar X site, where they will be examined, refurbished, and turned around for future missions. Little less than 11 minutes remaining on the clock today. Got a little more than 1,400 of you watching along with us live. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button. Allow some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage in the final 10 plus minutes of the count that we've got. Just under 10 minutes now, taking a beat to talk about the payload on board the Falcon 9 rocket. With this flight, there are, as we just mentioned, 28 Starlink V2 mini satellites on board. This will be the 65th Starlink launch of the year that featured these satellites. This will be the 64th that's a dedicated Starlink flight, with the Starlink 13-1 mission having contained a couple of Star Shield satellites, the government variant of Starlink. The satellites are considerably lighter than their previous V2 Mini versions, now that they're flying the optimized version of the V2 Mini. With their solar panels unfurled, they have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. Still use those Argon Hall effect thrusters for in-orbit maneuvering, still built up in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle. These satellites will be deployed at about 172 miles or 277 kilometers in altitude at a 53-degree inclination. This Falcon 9 rocket heading northeast once it leaves the pad. In fact, before we go ahead and get our pad level views of the rocket, let's take a beat and talk a little trajectory. Give you a more specific overview of where this Falcon 9 is going to be heading once it does leave the pad. After lifting off from Space Launch Complex 40 there at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, as just mentioned, the rocket will be flying in a northeasterly direction, heading along the coast of the east coast of the United States. Following stage separation, the first stage booster will target a touchdown on the drone ship called a shortfall of gravitas. If successful, this will be the 119th good landing on that particular drone ship and the 480th booster landing to date. As mentioned earlier in the show, the plan for the SpaceX first stage boosters is to certify them for up to 40 flights apiece. Well, same is true with the payload fairings. SpaceX has flown one at least 30 times. After making their entrance back through the atmosphere, they'll splash down in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the support of steerable parachutes. Once down in the waters, they'll be brought aboard one of these recovery vessels, and as we were just talking about, brought back over through the port and then on to Hangar X. Just under 7 minutes now. At this point, SpaceX is flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps on the engines of the booster to help protect them from the risk of thermal shock and damage during startup. Coming up in about just a little less than 30 seconds from now, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. T-minus 5 minutes and counting. In less than 30 seconds, that'll begin the Strongback retraction sequence. Teams will pressurize the Strongback for retraction.
Falcon 9 tanks are pressing for Strongback retract.
Hey, you just heard that good call out. We do have now both mission audio and pad level views of the Falcon 9 rocket. We were getting some indications of it from our tracking camera, but you can see there's a little bit of a fog bank that is rolled in, adding to the vapor created from the liquid oxygen.
Strongback retract has started.
A little bit of housekeeping here. As you can see, our clock in the upper right-hand corner of the screen is a little bit ahead of what you're seeing from SpaceX. Reason being, our clock is in real time, and what's coming in from SpaceX is on a slight delay. You can see those clamp arms just beneath the fairing halves opening up now. Referring back to the clock discrepancy, we'll be making callouts based off of real-time events as we have tracking views remaining of the Falcon 9 rocket. Once we're solely reliant, though, on the onboard camera views from SpaceX, we'll shift to their timeline of things. Three minutes and counting. At this point, the first stage liquid oxygen tank should be full. We'll hear that call out from SpaceX momentarily.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
Good call. We're now awaiting a similar call regarding the second stage LOX tank, which should come just past the 2-minute mark. T-minus 2 minutes and counting.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
With that call, the Falcon 9 rocket is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. You're also starting to see that extra venting there at the pad. Those are the ground gas closeouts. SpaceX releases the remaining liquid oxygen in the feed lines there at the pad.
Ground gas closeouts.
T-minus 1 minute and counting. The Falcon 9 has entered in its automation period.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
Should be hearing the SpaceX launch director give their go for launch coming up here in the next few seconds as well.
Launch director is go for launch.
With that call, we are less than 30 seconds away from seeing this Falcon 9 fly. For those just joining, the rocket will be heading up in a northeasterly trajectory once it leaves the pad.
T-minus 30 seconds.
15 seconds. And here we go. In 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 10-26 mission. Falcon 9 has cleared the tower. Hear what's referred to as the VAB screech, the echo of the engines reverberating off of the vehicle assembly building. Now, a little more than a minute into flight, the Falcon 9 rocket will throttle back as it approaches max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. Hitting that point now and throttling back up. Little more than a minute and a half into flight, SpaceX will now thermally condition the Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage.
Impact chill has started.
With that good call, we're coming up on a few events in fairly rapid succession. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO, at about T plus 2 minutes and 25 seconds. That'll be followed by stage separation and then the ignition of that Merlin vacuum engine. The payload fairings will jettison just before the 3-minute mark. About 10 seconds to MECO. MECO. Stage separation. And second stage engine start.
MECO. Stage separation confirmed. Impact ignition.
Good calls, good visuals from the SpaceX onboard cameras. There go the payload fairings in real time.
Fairing separation confirmed.
There you see the fairing jettison and a nice view of an orbital sunrise there on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen for just a second. You can see the lights of the Florida coastline as the rocket begins to cruise away as well, the first stage booster. We're coming up on 4 minutes into flight. The next milestone here will be the entry burn getting underway. That's when SpaceX will reignite 3 out of the 9 engines on the Falcon 9 first stage booster to begin to dramatically slow that vehicle down. So far appearing to be a very nominal flight. Looks like the first stage booster is going to be topping out at about 115 kilometers in altitude today. Now starting to make its descent towards the drone ship called a shortfall of gravitas. little more than 5 minutes into the flight. We're just about a minute away now from the start of the entry burn. We're about 10 seconds or so away from the start of the entry burn, and a nice view of that orbital sunrise coming off the edge of the booster there. Entry burn
Stage
underway
1
in real
FPS
time.
is saved.
Hard to catch the entry burn, but we got it via the
Stage 1 entry
tracker.
burn startup. Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
Both vehicles continue on a nominal trajectory.
Well, not quite the jellyfish effect that we were hoping for today, but the second stage is appearing brighter than we often see it, just given the fact that it is
Stage
heading
1
towards the
transonic.
sunlight. You can see that pretty clearly in the SpaceX onboard camera. How it's reflecting off of the Merlin vacuum engine nozzle.
Stage 2 is in terminal guidance.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
Stage 2 FTS is saved.
And a good landing of first stage booster B1078, completing its 22nd trip to space and back.
Seiko.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And a quick glimpse there of the Starlink satellites at the conclusion of SpaceX's broadcast there. Nice little change of pace for just a scant moment. 10 minutes into flight, we're Going to start to wrap things up here, just getting our launch replays in motion. As we're working on that, let's go ahead and take a look at our mission stats as they currently stand. With a good liftoff and landing of the first stage booster on the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas, that marked the 22nd good flight for Falcon Booster 1078. This was SpaceX's 508th Falcon 9 launch to date, 91st of the year so far. This was SpaceX's 445th Falcon booster reflight, or the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This was the company's 155th orbital launch within the last 365 days, the 268th orbital launch from Pad 40, and the 323rd overall orbital launch from Pad 40 as well. Adding to the bar chart here, you see SpaceX now just 5 launches shy of tying the total number of launches achieved in all of 2023. Moving on to some recovery stats. This was the 119th good landing on the drone ship called a short fall of gravitas. This was the company's 389th drone ship landing and the 480th overall SpaceX booster landing. Finally, with some industry stats, this was the 63rd launch from Florida this year, the 96th from U.S. soil, the 106th from a U.S. rocket company, and the 158th orbital launch attempt around the world. 3 orbital failures so far on the year. Here is where our pie chart now currently stands. Want to congratulate the folks at ESA and Arianespace for a good launch of their Vega C rocket earlier in the evening of about 10:03 p.m. Eastern. Once again, coming up later on today, we're looking towards the arrival of the Crew 11 astronauts and cosmonaut who are going to be touching down at the Space Florida Launch and Landing Facility in preparation for liftoff on their Falcon 9 rocket from over at Launch Complex 39A. You can keep tabs on that pad 24/7 over on our 24/7 stream, Launchpad Live. We're expecting the Falcon 9 rocket to emerge from the hangar. The hangar there at that pad in the coming day or so, either later tonight or sometime on Sunday is when that Falcon 9 rocket is expected to make its appearance. There will then be a dry dress rehearsal and a static fire test coming up on Monday in preparation for the launch of Crew 11 on July 31st at the earliest. Coming up tonight as well, we've got another Falcon 9 rocket launch for you. That is the launch of the Starlink 17-2 mission, set to lift off from Vandenberg Space Force Base, coming up at 8:55 p.m. Pacific, 11:55 p.m. Eastern, 03:55 UTC for our friends around the world. We'll have live coverage of that beginning about 30 minutes prior to liftoff, so if you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button, ring that bell icon on your way out the digital door, and we look forward to welcoming you back here for live coverage of that mission later on tonight. can see the Strongback is now being brought up into the upright position as part of SpaceX's process for turning around its workhorse pad Slick 40 as quickly as possible. Folks may have noticed that SpaceX revamped their website, added a couple additional features, part of which was adding a number more of their Starlink launches on the manifest, the public-facing manifest. So we know that the next flight coming off of this particular pad is set to be Starlink 10-29, which is set to launch with the window opening up at 11:30 p.m. Eastern, 03:30 UTC, coming up on July 29th. So just ahead of the launch of Crew 11. Also be one other Starlink mission coming up that following morning. Got the replays ready for you now. Let's start with the press site fixed view from our Adam Bernstein. And our last view, the tracking camera here at the press site. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. Really appreciate everyone for sticking around, joining us for an early morning pre-dawn launch from here on the Space Coast. A big thanks to our moderators in the chat. See, Mark Otto joined us throughout the course of the broadcast, and also thanks to Rick Donner. I want to thank other channel member Cumulus Granatus for helping to answer folks' questions in the chat. Big broad thanks to our channel member community for supporting our live launch coverage with every attempt. Thanks as well to our photography team, working hard to make these launches happen. Be sure to follow them at their handles here on X. Also, thanks to our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for helping to run the technical operations of the broadcast alongside John Pisani. Once again, we'll be busy quite a bit today, so we're going to go ahead and wrap things up as we're preparing for the arrival of Crew 11 over at the launch and landing facility. And then later on tonight, once again, last reminder, we've got the launch from Vandenberg Space Force Base, the flight Starlink 17-2 lifting off just before 9 p.m. tonight from the West Coast. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.